as long as we're looking at one's inner life, which I mean what one experiences, only by asking the questions we're taught to ask, the way we're taught to address it. I'm feeling this way, how do I feel better? All those are perfectly valid questions. They're not the kind of questions that actually get to the root of things. And it's the root of things that actually, at the root of things, things can actually change. And of course, real spirituality is dealing with the root of things. And it's actually made for those people who actually want to address their experience of existing from a very root level. From we could say, an ultimate level. Not that all the other levels don't have their place. They have their place, they have their time, they have their appropriateness. All of that is not something that I'm questioning. But when it comes to spirituality, it's really important that one see that the way that we often approach it is very much dictated by how we were taught to approach it. And we ask the kind of questions about our experience that we were taught to ask because we think they're the right questions to ask. So if we're feeling afraid, we're taught to ask somebody, how do I deal with my fear? How do I not be afraid? It seems a totally valid question, right? This is the way we're actually taught to address almost everything from a relatively surface standpoint. But if you get the basic principle, suffering is caused by a misperception. All suffering. Suffering, not pain, not like when you drop something on your foot and it hurts. That's pain. It's suffering. Any kind of suffering is caused by misperception. It means that we, at the moment we're suffering, we're not actually perceiving things as they are or as they were. When we don't do that, we suffer. That's the root cause of suffering. I'm not perceiving something the way it actually is. I'm perceiving it the way it is not. So when our inner conclusions clash with reality, that clash creates friction. Right? That friction is called suffering. Does it make sense? Pretty simple idea, isn't it? But it's simple to hear, it's simple to say, but if you really look at the implications, it's an absolutely radical change in the way in which we usually address our lives. Spiritual, psychological, on every level, even, mental, emotional, physical even. When we start to address our lives is in the way of, wait a minute, if I'm suffering in any way, it is because I'm misperceiving reality. It's not because this is happening, or so-and-so said this, or so-and-so did this. It's because I'm actually misperceiving reality. Why is it that you can line 10 people up, expose them to basically a very, very similar environment, or an exact environment, and then after they're exposed to it, you talk to them, and they have very different experiences of that, and they have very different conclusions, and some will be very offended, and some won't give a damn, some will think it was kind of funny. Everything you can get very, very different outcomes by exposing people to the exact same event. You can take a controlled study, take a group of people, expose them to the exact same thing, and you'll get very different internal experiences. What almost all, if not all of those people will actually be experiencing, they'll be experiencing their misperception of that event. And so they'll have different misperceptions. In spirituality, this is one of the things that's referred to when they talk about Maya, the dream. When they say people are walking around in a literal dream state, it is the state in which they are misperceiving the way things actually are. Misperceiving self. Of course, anybody that's been here before has heard me talk endlessly about the misperception of self actually makes you feel like you're a self. You think you're an isolated, individual, single person right here in the clothes that you're wearing, and that's all that you are, and that's all you'll ever be. That's just a misperception. And it's a perception that's there because you've been trained to perceive things that way. There's no other reason you train that you misperceive that, because when you correct the misperception, then you don't perceive that way at all. So when we misperceive self, oneself, we actually think we're separate. And we actually think this body, this mind, this personality structure, this actually is exclusively who I am, and everything and everybody else is somewhat different. That's a misperception. What's that misperception? Where does it arise from? Well, as the Buddha reminded us many years ago, and anybody that cares to look will discover for themselves, it comes from ignorance. It comes from conclusions about the nature of self that aren't actually true. They're not rooted in reality. And what spirituality as a core is going into those root conclusions and pulling them out.